I'm trying to figure out how to add sound to this movie that I already made. It seems to maybe be working. I'm just going to roll with this. We're going back to the tutorial to look at the authigenic feldspars, and I'm really going to have to speak quickly. Notice this brownish grain with the interesting texture to it. Turns out it's a fossil. Some other things around here, some quartz in the far left. And I'm hoping that you're remembering some of these colors and what they mean, like the primary porosity. Check out this oddly shaped mold. This is a thin feldspar overgrowth of what used to be a K-spar grain. Notice that the carbonates were not dissolved, whereas the feldspar was. Okay, and we see that entire overgrowth, and of course there's secondary porosity, a secondary pore in the middle. Probably more calcite, yes. Okay, so we have a number of things in here. We're zoomed in quite a bit. There's our primary pore. Notice that primary pores do not have to be round. They can be angular depending on what's a part of the arkose. So we have a bunch of detrital grains here, especially quartzes, and then the items that are stained pink are basically going to be plagioclase feldspar. So we have more than one plagioclase feldspar grain. It just so happens this one shows the most interesting texture. We have some secondary porosity, where part of this plagioclase has disappeared into our aqueous solution. And prior to that dissolution, we have this overgrowth of the potassium feldspar. Why do we know that the dissolution causing the secondary porosity happened happened after the K-spar overgrowth? How do we know that the K-spar overgrowth is first? Think that through. There's more of the secondary porosity. Okay. All right, next slide. So check it out here. We've got K feldspar. Notice that the K feldspar is a lot less clear and clean than the quartz, even though the quartz may have a lot of bubbles inside. And this K feldspar has a nice overgrowth that is really giving it a much more rectangular look and has trapped this bit of dusty clay rim. Here, this second grain has this mottled interior where it's been influenced by the dissolution, but where I'm pointing now is actually that clearer overgrowth that has fewer defects. Okay, this is a sandstone that has a lot of quartz in it. It's almost fully quartz. We can see some grain shapes, some rounded grain shapes in some areas. You can still see the grain outlines, but in other areas, it's really hard to distinguish the cement from the quartz. Okay, this is another fantastic example. You're going to get the sense here. What's the yellow stuff? What's the pink stuff? What's the white stuff? The quartz, primary porosity, outside the grain, plagioclase. And much of this plagioclase has dissolved. We have only a few remnants. And then we have the K-spar overgrowth. And somehow this grain dissolved even after the K-spar overgrowth to give us the intragranular secondary porosity. VRF, that's our volcanic rock fragment, saying this is an immature sandstone. Okay, take a look at the beautiful cleavage in this particular grain. It is a cave feldspar. We know that from the stain. And it has an overgrowth that in this case has a lot of pores in it. The overgrowth just has a lot of imperfections. And this is our authigenic or secondary potassium feldspar overgrowth. And it can be difficult to tell where the initial detrital grain, the smaller one and the bigger one, where the original boundaries were. Okay, lots of quartz, right, in the relatively clear, maybe a volcanic rock fragment here, maybe calcite or a volcanic rock or a partly dissolved feldspar, and then there's our primary porosity. Okay, here's the main feature. I'm not going to tell you about this, and that's because you can read and hopefully you're getting the sense of what this is. In this case, there's no remnant plagioclase. Oh, check that out, that little bud off the end. Sometimes you get nice crystal form if the overgrowth is able to expand into a pore. I love this picture. This picture reminds me of a kid's drawing of a giant face where the face is kind of a round blob. And then we've got this halo of like scribbled hair or a scribbled beard. And that is this overgrowth of the potassium feldspar. And when it is authigenic potassium feldspar, another name for that is adularia. Okay, so the interesting thing here is it's not feldspar growing on feldspar, it's feldspar growing on a quartz crystal, which is very unusual. And here we also have authigenic quartz. Now we could only tell the difference between the quartz and the cave feldspar because of the scanning electron microscope. But notice that the quartz has some crystal faces that are forming because of the way these crystals are growing in the primary pore space. Okay, one of my favorite images in this. It's a scanning electron microscope image, and check it out. Here's our adularia, our authigenic cave feldspar. But it's got a very different form than some of the other minerals around it. So check out the crystal habit, the crystal elongation, quartz. We have two minerals in this scene. We have quartz and we have cave feldspar. See if you can tell these apart. Okay, so notice that the cave feldspar very often grows on that face such that it leaves cleavages and different zones of crystal faces, whereas the quartz, we don't get any sense of that cleavage. All right, here we're really zoomed in on this one, and we've got some quartz, and the quartz has an overgrowth. So the older quartz has more inclusions or more defects in the interior, but the overgrowth, so there are the defects, but the overgrowth has fewer defects and fewer inclusions. So hopefully you can see, and also the overgrowth makes a nice crystal form, unlike that rounded bit. Okay, I'm not showing you the videos because when I tried to do that, it crashed the computer. All right, in this case, we're getting a plagioclase that is growing into that pore. And so this is an albidic plagioclase. It's precipitating from the solution, and because we're in cross-polarized light, we can see the twins of the plagioclase. All right, take a look at this. Clearly a feldspar, but a very complicated situation. Chessboard twinning, whoops, it went away. Chessboard twinning, we're having our original potassium feldspar instead have sodium switch into the feldspar structure, and that sodium is giving us the chessboard twinning. Here in XPL, we can now see that the newly grown albite feldspar, or albatization, gives us nice twinning, whereas the older K-spar is just sort of this skeletal effect. Always, we expect for higher temperature calcic plagioclase or intermediate calcic plagioclase to become more sodic. We can talk about why that is. Okay, check out all these different grains here, and we can look at this in PPL or XPL. We'll look in PPL first. We're going to find that there's a lot of quartz in this image. And then in the center, what do you think that is? There it is. It's a feldspar. It's got vacuoles forming, patchy extinction. It's starting to become replaced by albite. We're going to look at it in XPL, same image, okay? And we see that this, there's our quartz with its low magnification. And now, it makes a big deal out of the monocrystalline quartz versus the polycrystalline. The polycrystalline quartz might be from like a little piece of quartzite. You've got these little buds from when that rock formed. That's an actual metamorphic rock there. Whereas the monocrystalline quartz might be from a granite that's weathered. Okay, so here's our feldspar. It's vacuolized, and we're getting some albite forming. That's the end of this. I am not going to have us look at the last slide. It's the same thing over again. Oh, but here we didn't take a look at the calcite cement. So in this case, here we have a lot of calcite cement filling in the pores. There's some more of it. Notice how the calcite cement has the higher pastel birefringence colors. Our next tutorial will have a lot more about calcite. I hope I recorded this. I hope I can get it uploaded to you soon. Thanks so much for listening.